I found a box, small, wooden, and old, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my grandmother's attic. I almost didn't see it, but a faint glimmer of metal caught my eye when I shifted a stack of old books as I rummaged through the dust-laden space. The box was locked. My heart pounded as I ran my fingers over the tarnished brass latch. Why would my grandmother hide something like this? And what was inside? A quick search around the attic yielded nothing, but something told me to check her old vanity downstairs. She had always kept her most treasured items in the small, locked drawers, and I remembered finding an old jewelry key there once when I was a child. I hurried down the creaky wooden steps straight into her bedroom, the scent of lavender and aged paper still lingering in the air. I slid open the top drawer and felt around the edges. My fingers brushed against something cold and small, a key. Without a second thought, I grabbed the key and returned back to the attic. I held my breath as I inserted it into the locked box. With a soft click, the latch had been released. Inside the box was a folded letter. Its paper yellowed with age, but the ink was still dark and bold. I instantly recognized my grandmother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded it, revealing an urgent message that sent a chill down my spine. If you're reading this, I may already be gone, but you need to listen carefully. There is a key inside the fireplace. Use it before midnight. And whatever happens, don't trust anyone. I swallowed hard as I felt a lump formed in my throat. The message was rushed, as if she had written it in fear. My grandmother passed away almost a couple weeks ago. She had been old and frail, but now I wondered, had she died naturally, or had something happened to her? I reached inside the box again and pulled out a faded photograph tucked beneath the letter. It was of my grandmother, younger than I had ever seen her, standing beside a man whose face was scratched out. The date on the back read July 3rd, 1972. My heart pounded. What was she trying to tell me? What was this key? And more importantly, who was the man in the photograph? And why had his face been deliberately destroyed? I had too many questions, but only one thing was clear. I needed to find that key before midnight. Without wasting time, I hurried downstairs to the fireplace. My mind was racing as I realized what my grandmother left behind. This old house and apparently a mystery. Reaching the fireplace, I instantly knelt before it, brushing my fingers along the soot-covered bricks. Then, there. A small, rusted key taped behind one of the loose stones. It felt ice-cold in my palm, as though it had been waiting for me to find it. I briefly studied it, then my grandmother's voice suddenly echoed in my head, as if reminding me once again what she had always been telling since I was a little boy. Rule number 1, if someone leaves behind a hidden key, it means there's a locked door or a secret compartment nearby. I could still vividly remember those words, as if she had just told me about it. Then, almost immediately, I scanned the room. The only lock I knew of was on the study desk. My grandmother's old writing desk had always been kept shut. I'm not sure why, and I think it's about time for me to find out. Swallowing hard, I approached it with the key in my hand. The locked drawer, the key fit perfectly. My pulse quickened as I turned it. The drawer slid open with a faint creak, revealing a leather-bound notebook, another envelope, and an old map. My breath caught in my throat. The envelope had my name on it. With shaky hands, I tore it open, revealing another letter, shorter, but just as ominous. You must act fast. If you've found the key, it means they are watching. Go to the old train station. Find the truth, and whatever you do, don't let them know you have this. The notebook was filled with notes about someone named Richard Devlin. I had never heard of him, but there were dates, locations, and circled words like blackmail, missing, and evidence. The map, however, was more alarming. It showed the layout of our town, with a red X drawn over the old abandoned train station. Rule number 2. If a map leads to an abandoned place, it means something was left behind there. Again, my grandmother's voice rang in my head. I'm not sure if I'm just imagining it or if I'm losing my mind already. Shrugging my shoulder, I glanced at the clock, 11:15 p.m. I had 45 minutes before midnight. I don't know what I'm actually doing, but I suddenly felt so invested in this mini mystery my grandmother left me. I don't know what it's all about or what it is that I need to find out. I grabbed my jacket, stuffed the notebook and map into my backpack, and rushed out the front door. The night air hit me like a cold slap, sharp and unforgiving. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, as if the entire town was holding its breath. My car was parked in the driveway, but something in my gut told me not to take it. If they were watching, I couldn't risk being followed. Instead, I opted for my old bicycle tucked away in the shed. It had been years since I rode it, but the urgency in my grandmother's message left no room for hesitation. With each pedal stroke, my heart pounded harder, my mind racing to make sense of it all. Richard Devlin, blackmail, evidence. And now, Buffalo Central Terminal. I reached the outskirts of town within minutes. The terminal loomed in the distance, its Art Deco architecture still grand despite years of abandonment. Once a hub of movement and life, it now stood like a forgotten relic of a different time. Its windows shattered, the platform rusted and empty. I dropped my bike behind an overgrown bush and approached the entrance, my breath visible in the cold night air. The station was supposed to be locked up, but to my surprise, the old rusted gate stood slightly ajar. Someone had been here, or worse, someone was still here. I stepped inside cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The ceiling loomed high above, cracked and weathered by time. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows along the floor. I pulled out the map and traced my finger to the red X, East Wing, near the old ticket counters. Swallowing hard, I made my way through the abandoned station, dodging fallen beams and shattered glass. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow darker than the last. Then I heard it, a faint shuffle of footsteps. I wasn't alone. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat as I strained to listen. The sound was soft but deliberate, the kind of movement someone makes when they're trying not to be heard. Slowly, I pressed myself against the cold brick wall, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The station had been abandoned for years, no security, no maintenance crews. Whoever was here had a reason. I reached into my backpack and gripped the notebook tightly, as if it could somehow shield me. Then, cautiously, I stepped forward, following the map's path toward the East Wing. The old ticket counter stood in the distance, its once polished wood now dull and covered in dust. I crept closer, careful to avoid loose debris. Then, I saw it. A figure, or rather figures, standing in the shadows near the counter, partially obscured by a fallen beam. I could barely make out the silhouette, but they weren't moving. They were waiting, watching. I swallowed hard and took another step. A floorboard creaked beneath my weight. The figure shifted. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. I got nothing but silence. Then, without a warning, the figures bolted. "Hey, wait!" I shouted, my instincts kicking in. I took off after them, weaving through the wreckage, my heart slamming against my chest. They turned a corner, disappearing into the darkened hallways of the terminal. I chased after them, my sneakers skidding against the cracked tiles. Then suddenly, nothing. They were gone. I stopped, panting, my eyes darting around the empty space. Had they escaped through a hidden exit? Were they hiding in the darkness, watching me? I took a slow, measured breath and turned back toward the ticket counter. That's when I saw it, a small wooden box. It sat on the counter, untouched, as if it had been waiting for me. The same size, the same worn wood as the one in my grandmother's attic. I hesitated before reaching for it. My fingers brushed against the cold surface. And then, just as I lifted the lid, the station lights flickered on, and a voice echoed through the empty terminal. "You shouldn't have come here." Rule number 3, if the lights turn on in an abandoned place, someone wants you to be seen. My grandmother's voice echoed through my head, as clear as day. The lights above buzzed to life, flickering unevenly, casting long, shifting shadows across the dusty floor. My entire body went rigid. This station hadn't had power for years. There was no way those lights came on by accident. Someone was here, and they wanted me to know it. I snapped my head toward the direction of the voice. My pulse was hammering so hard it almost drowned out the sound of approaching footsteps, slow, precise. I turned on my heel, heart pounding, and shoved the wooden box into my backpack. Whatever was inside, I'd figure it out later. Right now, I need to make a choice. Run or face whoever had been waiting for me. The air was thick with dust, and my breath came in short, sharp gasps. My mind raced. The person I had been chasing had vanished, but now there was someone else, someone confident enough to speak first. A tall figure stepped into the dim light, a man in mid-40s. He wore a long coat, his hands tucked casually into the pockets, but there was something about the way he held himself, calm, controlled, like he had all the time in the world. I took an instinctive step back. He tilted his head slightly. "You look just like her." My stomach twisted at his words. "Like who?" The man let out a small chuckle, shaking his head as if amused. "Your grandmother. Always so curious, always pushing where she didn't belong." My fingers curled into fists as I felt my blood slowly boiling, mixing with the subtle fear creeping through me. "Who are you?" He ignored my question, then his gaze flickered down to my backpack. "You found it, didn't you?" I took another step back. The old wooden box suddenly felt heavier inside my bag. He sighed. "I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this the hard way." Something in his voice sent ice through my veins, and my rational thinking was screaming at me. "Run." The word exploded in my mind before my body even registered it. I turned on my heel and bolted toward the exit, but before I could reach the door, the lights cut out, leaving the entire station in total darkness. For a second, silence stretched, thick, foreboding, and suffocating. My breath came in short, frantic bursts as I spun in place, trying to orient myself. The man had been standing just a few feet away. Had he moved? Was he coming closer? I couldn't tell. I forced myself to focus, listening, really listening. A faint shuffling sound to my left, the scrape of a shoe against the tiled floor. Then, nothing. I couldn't hear anything, aside from my rasped breathing. I needed to move, fast. I pivoted toward the entrance with my heart slamming against my ribs. I knew the general direction, but with the lights gone, the darkness was absolute. I took a cautious step forward, then another. A breath ghosted against my ear. Cold, close. I whipped around, swinging blindly, my fist connecting with empty air. A chuckle, low and amused, echoed in the space around me. "You're quick," the man's voice murmured, shifting now to my right, but not quick enough. I lunged forward, reaching for anything, his coat, his arm, a distraction. But my fingers closed around nothing. He was playing with me. Then, all of a sudden, a hand clamped around my wrist. I barely had time to react before my own momentum betrayed me. A sharp yank sent me stumbling forward, slamming into a solid chest. The scent of leather and something metallic filled my nose before I twisted, jerking free. Footsteps, mine, his, I couldn't tell anymore. My pulse roared in my ears, loud and deafening. I took off in a blind sprint, my shoulder crashing into something, a rusted bench, a toppled sign, before I hit open space again. The platform. If I could just get outside. A shadow lunged from the darkness. A strong arm hooked around my waist, dragging me back. I thrashed, elbowing hard, and was rewarded with a grunt of pain. Then the grip loosened just enough. I tore free. Without hesitation, I reached into my backpack, shakily yanking out the wooden box. If this was what he wanted, fine. Without a second thought, I hurled it as hard as I could. The box hit the tiled floor with a sharp crack, the old wood splintering on impact. Something small and metallic tumbled out, skidding across the ground. It was a key. The man froze. Even in the darkness, I could feel his stare locked onto it. A beat of silence stretched between us before he moved. Not toward me, but toward the key. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next, so I quickly bolted away. This time, I didn't look back. I sprinted through the station, feet pounding against the floor, lungs burning. The cold air hit me like a wall as I burst through the rusted gate and into the night. My bike, my only way out. I lunged for it, hands shaking as I yanked it upright. Behind me, the station loomed, dark and still, too still. Then, just as I shoved off, pedaling with everything I had, a voice drifted from the shadows. Low, amused, unshaken. "You can run, but this is just the beginning." In panic, I accidentally ran the bike over a rubble, causing me to stumble and fall. I quickly collected myself and pulled up the bike, only to find out that its chain was dislodged from the gears. Crap. I cursed under my breath as I didn't know what to do next. Feeling the man's presence closing in, I decided to push myself to run forward and leave the bike behind. My shoulder crashed into a rusted bench, pain jolting through my arm, but I barely felt it. My only thought was to escape. So I scrambled forward, ignoring the sting in my side, my breaths ragged as I searched for any exit or anywhere I could hide. The train station was stretched into darkness ahead of me, vast and empty except for the debris littering the floor. I ducked behind a fallen beam, pressing my back against the cold steel, forcing myself to stay quiet. Rule number 4, never ignore the whispers. They carry warnings. They carry truths. My grandmother's voice rang in my head once again, calm yet firm, just as I remembered it from all those nights she had tucked me in with her cryptic lessons. At that time, I thought they were just stories, tales meant to scare me or make me cautious of the world. But now, they felt like instructions, warnings meant for this very moment. And suddenly, a whisper slithered through the air, as if calling my attention. The sound was barely audible beneath the distant hum of the city beyond. I stiffened, pressing myself deeper into the shadows. It wasn't just the wind. It was something else. Or perhaps someone else. Then I heard another sound. Footsteps, slow and measured. The man was still following me, his pace unhurried, as if he already knew I had nowhere to run. "I know you're in there," he said, followed by the increasing sound of his shoes clicking against the weathered floor. "Your grandmother thought she could outrun us too." His voice echoed through the abandoned station, bouncing off the walls. "But she learned the truth too late. I hope, for your sake, you don't make the same mistake." I clenched my jaw, swallowing back my fear. Truth? What truth? What had my grandmother been running from? What had she known that had put her life in danger? I darted away from my hiding spot, slipping through a broken doorway that led deeper into the Buffalo Central Terminal. The air grew colder as I entered what looked like an old maintenance corridor. Rusted pipes lined the walls, and the scent of damp concrete mixed with something acrid, something old and rotting. Instinctively, I fished out my phone from my pocket. The weak glow of its flashlight cast long, twisted shadows as I stepped carefully over debris. Then I saw it. A door, slightly ajar with a faded sign that read "Restricted Access." I hesitated only for a second before pushing it open. Inside was a small, cluttered office, seemingly untouched for decades. Papers were strewn across the desk, yellowed with age. An old rotary phone sat beside a cracked nameplate, the name too faded to read. But what caught my eye was a rusted filing cabinet with its drawer forced open, like someone had gone through it in a hurry. And on the desk, scrawled in frantic handwriting on an old train schedule, were 4 words: "Turn to your right." Which I did. Then I found a silhouette of a woman just a meter away from me, standing, unmoving. I was about to reach out to her when I felt something poke just below my nape. And before I realized what just happened, my vision blurred, my world twisted, then at the same time my entirety turned numb. And the last thing I remember was my body dropping to the ground as I succumbed to nothingness. Then everything went blank, pitch black. I didn't know how long I was out. A sharp, electric pulse surged through my skull, dragging me back into consciousness. My head throbbed as I struggled to blink away the darkness, my senses swimming in a haze. My body felt sluggish, heavy, like I was wading through thick tar. A faint buzzing noise filled my ears, growing louder with every passing second. I wasn't lying on the cold, hard floor of the abandoned train station anymore. Instead, I was in a chair, my wrists bound behind me, the coarse rope biting into my skin. The air was stale, thick with the scent of damp paper and rust. A dim light flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the peeling walls of what appeared to be another forgotten office. A voice, low and measured, cut through the predominating silence. "You woke up sooner than I expected." I turned my head toward the sound, my vision still swimming. A man sat across from me, his face obscured by the shadows. He wasn't the one who had been following me earlier. This was someone else. Someone calmer, more calculating. "Who are you?" I rasped, my throat dry as sandpaper. He leaned forward just enough for the light to catch his features. A man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a sharp, unforgiving gaze. A jagged scar ran down the side of his cheek, disappearing beneath the collar of his dark coat. "I think the better question is, who are you?" He tilted his head slightly as returned the question to me, while observing me like I was some puzzle he was trying to piece together. "Because, from where I'm sitting, you're just another loose end." A sudden chill ran down my spine. Loose end? I swallowed hard, my mind racing. My grandmother's rules had always been strange, cryptic, but they had kept me safe. Until now. Whatever she had been hiding from, whatever she had been trying to protect me from, it had finally caught up to me. I forced myself to steady my breathing before mustering all the remaining courage I had in me. "What do you want?" The man let out a soft chuckle, the sound devoid of humor. "Want?" He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, yellowed envelope. He held it up between two fingers. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you have, whether you know it or not." My pulse pounded in my ears as he placed the envelope on the table in front of me. The paper looked old, fragile, like it had been handled too many times. "Your grandmother had this in her possession before she died," he continued, "and now, it seems, it has found its way to you." I stared at the envelope, my mind a whirlwind of questions. My grandmother had been running from something, someone, and now, whatever game she had been playing, I had unknowingly stepped into it. The whispers from before echoed in my mind once more. Never ignore the whispers. They carry warnings. They carry truths. I clenched my fists. If I was going to survive this, I needed to start listening. I took a slow, measured breath, my eyes locked on the yellowed envelope resting on the table before me. My grandmother had been holding on to it before she died, or rather, before she disappeared. The man across from me had chosen his words carefully. He didn't say how she died. He had only said she had this in her possession. Slowly, he circled around me, keeping an ample distance before settling behind me, untying just my hands. Once done, he quickly returned to the spot where he was earlier. I lifted my gaze back to him while stretching and fidgeting my hands. "What's inside?" He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Open it and find out." I hesitated. My fingers ached to reach for it, but my instincts screamed caution. If my grandmother had gone to such lengths to protect whatever was in there, opening it now, under his watchful eye, felt like walking straight into a trap. Instead, I met his stare and asked the question that had been circling in my head since the moment I woke up. "Why am I a loose end?" His smile faltered just slightly, but his expression remained unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "Because your grandmother's secrets didn't die with her. She left trails, breadcrumbs, if you will. And now you're standing at the end of that trail." Breadcrumbs. I swallowed, my throat tight. My grandmother had always been careful, always wary. Her rules, her warnings, they were never just cautionary tales. They were survival tactics, but I had ignored them, and now I was here, bound to a chair, being interrogated by a man who seemed to know more about my family than I did. I exhaled through my nose. "Then you already know I don't have the answers you're looking for." "Not yet," he admitted, "but you will." Before I could respond, he pushed the envelope toward me with two fingers. "Go on," he murmured. "Indulge your curiosity." The man watched me carefully, his fingers drumming against the table. "You have no idea what you're caught up in, do you?" I clenched my jaw. "Why don't you enlighten me?" His lips curved into something between a smirk and a grimace. "Your grandmother wasn't just running, she was buying time." A chill crept up my spine. Buying time for what? For you. Before I could process his words, he pulled out something from the envelope, a small, rusted key with a number etched onto it. 1739. My breath hitched. I had seen that number before, on an old locked trunk in my grandmother's attic, a trunk I had never been able to open. "You think she left you nothing but whispers and paranoia," the man said, his voice low, steady. "But she left you more than that. She left you a choice." A choice. The weight of it settled in my chest, heavy and suffocating. "Open the trunk," he continued. "See for yourself. Then decide if you want to keep running." He leaned in, his shadow stretching over me. "Or if you're ready to finish what she started." A sharp knock sounded on the door behind him. The man straightened, his expression darkened. "Our time is up," he murmured, rising to his feet. "Make the right choice." Before I could respond, the lights flickered, and he was gone. But the key remained. And with it, a truth I was no longer sure I wanted to uncover. The key sat on the table, dull and unassuming, yet it felt heavier than anything I had ever held. 1739. I knew that number. My grandmother's attic. The locked trunk. A pulse of dread coursed through me. What the hell had she been hiding? I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for an answer, but before I could react, the sharp knock at the door turned into a violent bang. Someone was trying to get in. The man stiffened, his gaze snapping to the door. His entire demeanor changed. Calm turned to steel. He grabbed the key, pressing it into my palm, his grip bruising. "Listen to me," he hissed. "You're running out of time. Do not let them take you." Them? The lock rattled, and the door slammed open. A man in a suit, tall, built like a wall, stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room. Behind him, two more figures followed, faces obscured, movements controlled, almost inhuman. The air in the room shifted, thickened. The man who had interrogated me was already backing away, his posture tense, afraid. The suited man stepped forward. "You should have handed her over when you had the chance." A knife glinted in his hand. I barely had time to register what was happening before the first man turned to me, his eyes burning with something I couldn't name. "Run." The next second, the suited man lunged. The first man moved faster, slamming the table between them, knocking over the dim lamp. The room plunged into shadows, chaos. A hand grabbed my wrist, not his, cold, unforgiving. A voice whispered against my ear, "You belong to us." Panic erupted in my chest. I twisted, kicked, my foot connected with something solid, but their grip only tightened. A needle pressed against my skin. I struggled, but the world blurred. No, not again. But before I even complained, there it was again. Darkness, deep and endless. It was like I was thrown into the abyss, helpless and hopeless. Then a voice came to my ear, soft, familiar, and unearthly comforting. Weird. "Wake up, Marty, wake up." A sharp gasp tore from my throat as I jolted awake, my body slick with sweat. "Oh, thank God, it was just a dream," I murmured, unintentionally, then instinctively brushed my fingers up on my throbbing head. My pulse thundered in my ears, briefly deafening me, and for a moment, I struggled to separate reality from the nightmare that had just swallowed me whole. The weight of everything still clung to me, the phantom sensation of ropes digging into my wrists, the cold press of unseen eyes watching me ominously. Suddenly, it was gone. They're all gone. I blinked rapidly, my breath coming in shallow, uncontrolled bursts. Then it hit me, my room. I was in my room. The familiar scent of old books and lavender drifted through the air. The bedside lamp cast a soft golden glow, its warmth starkly different from the cold, damp air of the nightmare. My limbs trembled as I pushed myself up. My phone sat on the nightstand. I grabbed it with a shaking hand. 11:15 p.m. shone on the screen. Then almost instantly, I put my phone back. I exhaled shakily and unintentionally mouthed, "A dream. Just a dream, Marty. I stopped. My voice hitched and my tongue tucked in my throat as I saw the very person my nightmare circled on. My grandmother. She was sitting at the edge of my bed, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her silver hair glowed softly in the lamplight, framing a face etched with quiet wisdom. She was exactly as I remembered, her presence familiar and grounding. But something about the way she sat so still, so watchful, made unease slither down my entirety. She shouldn't be here. She had been gone for almost 2 weeks now. The silence between us stretched, pressing down on me like a weight. My mouth felt dry, my tongue thick as I struggled to form words. "Grandma?" My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied me with those sharp, knowing eyes, the kind that had always seen straight through my lies as a child. Then, at last, she spoke. Her voice was cold and devoid of emotions. "Rule number 5, when you wake from a nightmare, listen carefully. If the room is too quiet, then the dream isn't over yet." A shiver crawled up through me as she spoke. I gulped. "What?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving mine. "You're still dreaming, child." The words barely had time to sink in before I heard it. A whisper, not from her, from behind me. The sound was faint, almost too soft to catch, like breath against my ear, like a shadow dragging itself across the floor. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The silence in the room felt wrong now, deeper than it should be. No ticking from the clock. No rustling of the wind against the window. Nothing. Only my grandmother was watching me. Only the whisper at my back. If I was still dreaming, then how had I woken up? And if my grandmother was here, alive and well, then who had we buried? And more importantly, if I wasn't awake yet, then what happens when the dream finally ends?